The hospital's back parking lot echoed with ambulance sirens and emergency radio chatter. A woman with long brown hair, face dusty from the road, sat behind the wheel of an ambulance. She pulled the parking brake, opened her door, and climbed out of the vehicle. A staff member called out mockingly, "You're just a driver. Wait in the lobby." She said nothing, grabbed her medical bag, and ran alongside the stretcher into the ER. The nurse looked up and saw the woman's hands, calluses along her index finger, thin scars across her palm, marks from suturing wounds under pressure. The nurse froze, whispering, "Those are the hands of a battlefield medic. Meet Sofia Klein, 30 years old. European heritage with Austrian-German roots that showed in her sharp cheekbones and the disciplined way she carried herself. Long brown hair pulled back in a low ponytail, fair skin that spoke of northern climates, and the kind of cold beauty that became warm when she focused on helping others. Her eyes held a calm steadiness that came from seeing too much but never losing hope. She wore the simple uniform of an EMS driver: gray polo shirt, dark blue tactical pants, duty boots, and nitrile gloves clipped to her belt pocket. A radio was clipped to her shoulder, crackling occasionally with dispatch calls. Sofia worked at Riverview General Hospital in a windswept hill town where the EMS service was chronically understaffed. She had signed on as a part-time ambulance driver, filling gaps in the schedule when regular drivers were unavailable. Her personnel file was surprisingly brief: driver Class C commercial license, experience, extensive highway miles. No one had asked for details beyond her driving record and basic EMT certification. No one seemed curious about where she had gained her experience or why someone with her obvious competence was content with such a basic role. The attitude toward her was typical of what drivers experienced in medical settings. The dispatcher made it clear: drivers transport patients, no medical intervention beyond basic first aid. A young paramedic had been even more direct on her first day. "Don't touch IVs, don't manage airways, leave the medical stuff to people who know what they're doing." Sofia had simply nodded and said nothing. She never argued with protocol or challenged anyone's authority. But her approach to the job revealed depths that others didn't notice. She checked tires, brakes, and oxygen systems with the thoroughness of someone who understood that mechanical failure could mean death. She positioned tourniquets in the door compartment where they could be reached in under 1 second with her left hand. Her pre-shift inspection included running her hands along the ambulance frame, feeling for vibrations or irregularities that might indicate developing problems. During her first emergency call, a multi-vehicle accident with multiple trauma patients, Sofia had navigated a steep, narrow mountain road with precision that impressed even veteran paramedics. She left exactly 3 centimeters clearance past concrete barriers, maintaining speed while providing the smooth ride that trauma patients needed. "Nice driving," the paramedic had commented. "But remember, you stay with the ambulance when we get to the ER." Sofia hadn't argued. She helped push the stretcher through the emergency department doors, then stepped back when the doctors took over. Her quiet helpfulness extended beyond work hours. At a small restaurant near the hospital, she had noticed the elderly owner struggling with a broken blood pressure monitor. Sofia had quickly repaired the tubing and returned it to him, explaining, "When you're waiting for emergency help, this will let you get quick readings." The owner had smiled gratefully. "Are you a doctor?" "No," Sofia had replied simply. "I drive ambulances." But not everyone appreciated her quiet competence. In the break room, someone had made a cutting comment. "Ever notice how our driver always carries that medical bag? Like she's trying to look more important than she really is." Sofia hadn't responded to the mockery. She had simply checked her bag's contents: suturing needles, arterial clamps, occlusive dressings, 14-gauge needles, 4-0 Prolene suture. Everything positioned exactly where muscle memory would find it in the dark. Her colleagues saw a driver who took her job seriously. They didn't see someone whose hands moved with the precision of extensive surgical experience, whose scanning patterns suggested security training, whose calm under pressure came from working in conditions far more dangerous than civilian emergency medicine. In Sofia's wallet, tucked behind her driver's license, was a small piece of worn fabric with hand-embroidered text, "Hold the line." She had never explained to anyone where it came from or what it meant. The explosion came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. A series of gas explosions at the Riverside Industrial Complex sent shockwaves through the city and triggered the hospital's mass casualty incident protocol. Sofia's radio crackled to life. All available units respond to Code Orange MCI, multiple trauma patients incoming. Drivers focus on rapid transport cycles. She arrived at the scene to find organized chaos. Emergency vehicles lined the access road, their red and blue lights painting everything in urgent colors. Smoke billowed from several buildings, and the sound of secondary explosions echoed across the water. Sofia parked her ambulance in a position that maximized wind direction advantages and positioned the vehicle for rapid exit. She set up traffic cones to create a temporary one-way flow pattern, then reported to the incident commander for assignment. "Drivers stay outside the red zone," a fire captain instructed, pointing to tape that marked the safety perimeter. "Leave the rescue work to trained personnel." Sofia nodded and took her position, but her eyes were constantly moving, cataloging details that others missed. She noted where smoke patterns indicated structural instability, which areas of flooring showed stress damage, and where electrical systems were sparking, all signs that could indicate secondary collapse. The first patient was a man in his 40s with an open fracture and arterial bleeding that was spraying in the characteristic pattern of a severed vessel. The attending paramedic was struggling with tourniquet placement, fumbling with the sizing and positioning. Without being asked, Sofia handed him the correct size tourniquet and guided his hands to the proper placement sequence, timing the application and marking the time on medical tape with practiced efficiency. "Thanks," the paramedic said, then quickly added, "But remember, no IV placement." Sofia stepped back without comment. The second patient presented a more complex challenge. A young woman in her 20s was breathing with the distinctive wheeze and chest expansion that indicated tension pneumothorax, air building up in the chest cavity and compressing the lungs and heart. "Who's got a 14-gauge needle?" came the urgent call from overwhelmed emergency personnel. Sofia quietly opened her kit, pulled out a 14-gauge needle, and handed it directly to the paramedic, adding in a low voice, "Fourth intercostal space, mid-axillary line." The paramedic followed her guidance, and the distinctive hiss of escaping air was immediately followed by improved oxygen saturation readings on the patient's monitor. He looked at Sofia with confusion and growing respect. "Where did you learn that technique?" "Emergency medicine," Sofia replied simply, then returned to organizing equipment for the next patient. During the transport back to Riverview General, Sofia demonstrated driving skills that went far beyond basic ambulance operation. She used engine braking to maintain smooth deceleration, took turns with precision that minimized patient movement, and maintained speeds that balanced urgency with stability. At the hospital, the security guard raised his hand. "Drivers stay outside the ER." But Maya Jensen, a 33-year-old nurse with brown blonde hair who managed the emergency department's trauma bay, was watching Sofia carefully. As Sofia helped transfer patients from the ambulance stretcher, Maya noticed details that others missed. Sofia's hands showed the telltale signs of extensive medical experience. Calluses ran along her index finger in the pattern that came from thousands of hours holding surgical instruments. Thin scars crossed her palm where sharp instruments had slipped during high-pressure procedures. Most telling were the small white marks along the inside of her hands, the kind of scarring that came from suturing, setting bones, and opening chest cavities under field conditions. Maya had worked with enough trauma surgeons to recognize the hands of someone who had performed surgery under combat conditions. "You've sutured arteries without proper lighting, haven't you?" Maya asked quietly. Sofia avoided eye contact. "I'm an ambulance driver." Before Maya could ask more questions, another ambulance arrived with the second wave of casualties. A young construction worker with a blackened face and distended abdomen was brought in with weak pulse and signs of internal bleeding. The emergency physician was tied up in surgery, and the ER was overwhelmed with patients. "Maintain abdominal pressure until ultrasound is available," Maya called out, trying to manage multiple critical patients simultaneously. The patient suddenly went into convulsions, his blood pressure dropping dangerously. Someone dropped a critical clamp. That's when Sofia made a decision that would change everything. She placed her hand on the patient's femoral artery, counted the pulse, and her eyes shifted focus like changing channels in her mind. "I'll hold pressure on the artery. You establish IV access," Sofia said quietly to Maya. "Drivers aren't allowed to—" Someone started to protest. Maya cut them off. "Let her work." What happened next revealed skills that officially Sofia shouldn't have possessed. She stabilized the bleeding site, applied pressure to control hemorrhage, and placed occlusive dressing over a chest wound that she had identified through assessment techniques that weren't taught in basic EMT training. She guided Maya through establishing large-bore IV access and preparing O-negative blood products. "Count to 10, then release for 3, Sofia instructed, referring to tourniquet rotation timing that only battlefield medics typically knew. Maya stared at her for a long moment, the pieces falling into place. Around Sofia's left wrist was a thin red cord tied with 3 knots. When Maya accidentally touched it, Sofia pulled her hand back and said only, 3 operations without lights. The mass casualty incident continued to overwhelm Riverview General's emergency department. Patients filled every available space. Monitors beeped urgent warnings from multiple directions, and the hospital had declared an internal code black. All available resources committed to emergency response. The attending physician was trapped in surgery with the most critical cases, leaving Maya and her team to manage a steady stream of trauma patients with inadequate medical coverage. Ventilators were being shared between patients. Ultrasound equipment had a waiting list, and the usual protocols were breaking down under the sheer volume of casualties. That's when the most critical patient arrived. A construction worker in his 30s was brought in with obvious signs of internal bleeding, distended abdomen, rapid weak pulse, and the kind of pallor that indicated massive blood loss. Maya could see that this was a surgical emergency that needed immediate intervention. "We need needle decompression," Maya called out as the patient's chest became rigid and his blood pressure dropped toward shock levels. But the 14-gauge needle fell between stretchers in the chaos. Everyone was overwhelmed, moving between multiple critical patients, and precious seconds were being lost. Sofia was standing in the exact right position. She handed Maya a fresh 14-gauge needle and said quietly, "4th to 5th intercostal space." Air hissed out under pressure. The patient's blood pressure stabilized. The monitors stopped their urgent alarms. Maya now had the full picture of who she was working with. Sofia's gloves fit perfectly because she had worn surgical gloves thousands of times. Her wrist angle when holding pressure on arteries was textbook because she had learned the technique under fire. Her movements were economical and precise because wasted motion had once meant the difference between life and death. Maya leaned close and whispered, "Where were you deployed?" Sofia answered without hesitation now. "Marja 2015, Mosul 2016, then disappeared." "What was your rank?" "Rank doesn't matter anymore." The truth emerged in fragments as they worked together to stabilize the critical patient. Sofia Klein had been a senior combat medic with an unnamed unit that officially didn't exist. Her service record had been largely classified, her identity scrubbed from most databases when her unit was disbanded. Marja Province, 2015. Sofia had sutured a femoral artery using the dim light from an armored vehicle's headlamp, keeping 2 soldiers alive until they could reach evacuation. The operation had taken place while under enemy fire, with no proper surgical facilities and minimal equipment. Mosul, 2016. 7 minutes of emergency surgery, opening an airway and placing chest drainage tubes while artillery shells fell around their position. She had saved a reconnaissance team that had been trapped in a collapsed building, working by feel when smoke made visibility impossible. When her unit was disbanded and records classified, Sofia had chosen to disappear rather than seek recognition for her service. She had returned to civilian life and taken a job driving ambulances because she understood that sometimes people died simply because help arrived too late. But now, facing a patient who would die without immediate intervention, Sofia made the decision to fully use her skills. "I need to work on him," Sofia said quietly to Maya. 12 minutes to buy time until the surgeon is available." Maya looked around the overwhelmed ER, saw that the attending physician was still in surgery, and made a decision that would define her career. "I'll take responsibility. Do what you need to do." Sofia opened her medical kit and arranged instruments with the precision of an operating room setup. Clamps, sutures, and surgical tools appeared in perfect order. 12 minutes, she repeated, and began to work. Minutes 1, 2:30, Sofia made a minimal incision to access the bleeding site, packed with sterile gauze, placed decompression drainage, and secured the airway. Minutes 2:30 to 5 o'clock, she initiated fluid resuscitation based on shock index calculations, optimized patient positioning, and marked the primary hemorrhage site. Minutes 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, temporary hemostatic suturing using interrupted stitches, arterial pressure control with precisely angled clamps, and contamination control using warmed irrigation solution. Minutes 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, assessment of peripheral circulation, application of fresh occlusive dressings, and preparation for OR transfer. The monitors gradually stabilized. Oxygen saturation improved. The patient's skin regained healthy color. No one spoke loudly. The only sounds were the precise clicking of instruments working in practice rhythm. Fire Chief Ortega arrived at the hospital covered in soot from the industrial complex. He walked into the ER expecting to coordinate with medical staff about additional casualties, but stopped cold when he saw the patient Sofia had just stabilized. The bandaging pattern, the suture work, the precisely placed drainage tubes, everything showed the unmistakable signature of battlefield surgery. "Who performed this procedure?" he asked Maya. Maya pointed to Sofia, who was calmly removing her surgical gloves and disposing of them in the proper medical waste container. Ortega stared at Sofia with recognition dawning in his eyes. "I've seen this technique before, in combat zones." The ER fell quiet for several heartbeats. One of the paramedics had tears in his eyes from relief at seeing patients stabilized who had been beyond their ability to help. When the attending physician finally emerged from surgery and received Maya's briefing, driver with battlefield medic training, 12 minutes of surgical intervention, created time for the entire team. He nodded with deep appreciation. "Thank you for not waiting for me," he said simply. Sofia looked down at her blood-stained gloves, rolled them properly for disposal, and placed them in the red medical waste container with the same precision she brought to everything else. The security guard who had tried to keep her out of the ER walked over and quietly said, "Ma'am, I apologize. I didn't understand." "No apology necessary," Sofia replied. "Good security protocol saved lives. You were doing your job." Maya watched as Sofia gathered her equipment, restocked her medical kit, and prepared to return to her ambulance for the next call. "Will you work with us again?" "I'm an ambulance driver," Sofia said with a slight smile. "I'll be here whenever you need transport." As news of the day's events spread through the hospital, the story wasn't shared as gossip, but as a lesson in recognizing expertise wherever it appears, and in the importance of teamwork across professional boundaries. CTA, type, "I owe a debt," if you've ever been saved by someone who never asked for their name to be remembered. The hospital fell quiet as the last of the emergency patients was stabilized and transferred to appropriate care. The code black was lifted, normal staffing patterns resumed, and the ER began to return to its regular rhythm. Maya found Sofia in the ambulance bay, restocking her medical kit with the methodical attention to detail that she now understood reflected years of life or death experience. "Coffee?" Maya asked, holding out a cup of black coffee. Sofia smiled. the first genuine smile Maya had seen from her all day. "Thank you." The morning debriefing session brought together all the emergency responders who had participated in the mass casualty response. Fire Chief Ortega requested that the 12-minute emergency stabilization protocol be incorporated into the city's official MCI response procedures. Maya asked permission to conduct internal training sessions, techniques for maintaining life when physicians are unavailable. Sofia didn't want to stand at the front of the room teaching. Instead, she positioned herself beside Maya, making small adjustments to hand positions, suggesting timing modifications, and sharing the kind of practical knowledge that could only come from extensive field experience. "The goal isn't to make you into surgeons," Sofia explained to the assembled medical staff. "It's to give you confidence and skills to stabilize patients until expert help arrives." Her training approach was practical and focused on techniques that could be applied under the high-stress, resource-limited conditions that characterized real emergencies. She taught them to assess trauma patients systematically, to prioritize interventions based on immediate life threats, and to work efficiently even when surrounded by chaos. "In emergency medicine," she told them, "the first 12 minutes often determine whether someone lives or dies. Your job is to buy time for the surgeons to save lives." Lieutenant Rodriguez from the paramedic service, who had initially dismissed Sofia's medical knowledge, became one of her most attentive students. "Ma'am, can I ask you something? How do you stay so calm when everything around you is falling apart?" Sofia considered the question carefully. Training helps, but more importantly, focusing on what you can control instead of what you can't. When someone's life depends on your actions, panic becomes a luxury you can't afford. The transformation in the hospital's emergency response capability was measurable. Staff members who had previously felt helpless in complex trauma situations now had confidence in their ability to provide meaningful intervention. Response times improved because teams could begin effective treatment immediately instead of waiting for physicians to become available. On the training room whiteboard, someone had written, "Hold the line." Another note appeared on the bulletin board. 12 minutes, buy a life. No one signed these messages. Everyone understood their meaning. During her lunch break, the elderly restaurant owner brought Sofia an apple pastry. "These hands," he said, looking at her palms, "these are hands that save lives." Sofia smiled gently. "These are hands that drive ambulances." Maya, who was sitting nearby, added, "These are the hands of a battlefield medic." The comment drew quiet laughter from the other staff members. 6 months later, the hospital's trauma response statistics showed significant improvement in patient outcomes. Lives were being saved that would have been lost under previous protocols, not because of new equipment or additional staff, but because existing personnel had learned to use their skills more effectively. Sofia continued her work as an ambulance driver, but now with the quiet respect of the entire medical community. She still wore the same simple uniform, still carried the same comprehensive medical kit, and still approached each call with the same methodical competence. But when she arrived at emergency scenes, experienced medical personnel looked for her assessment and followed her recommendations. The just a driver who had been dismissed months earlier was now recognized as the most qualified trauma specialist in the region. CTA, type, "I will live decently." If you believe skill and courage should be used to save lives, not for personal recognition. Sofia Klein proved that job titles don't define someone's value during a crisis. The skills that matter most often come from experiences that don't appear on official resumes, and heroes frequently wear uniforms without shoulder boards. In every workplace, there are people whose capabilities go far beyond their current role descriptions. Veterans who have transitioned to civilian careers, retired professionals who stay involved in their communities, people who have faced extraordinary challenges and emerged with extraordinary skills. The most dangerous mistake we can make is assuming we know someone's capabilities based on their job title or appearance. Sofia looked like a simple ambulance driver, but she carried the surgical expertise of a combat veteran who had saved lives under the worst possible conditions. 2 years after the industrial complex incident, Sofia was promoted to Emergency Medical Training Coordinator for the regional hospital system, a position created specifically to utilize her unique combination of field experience and teaching ability. Under her leadership, survival rates for major trauma incidents improved by 45% across the entire region. But Sofia's greatest impact wasn't in the statistics. It was in changing how emergency responders thought about their roles and each other. She had demonstrated that expertise comes in many forms, and that the person who saves your life might be someone you never expected. The hospital's training facility now displays a plaque with Sofia's guiding principle. Excellence in emergency response comes from recognizing and utilizing all available expertise, regardless of its source. New medical staff learn Sofia's story as part of their orientation, not as a lesson about surgical technique, but as a reminder about professional humility and the importance of teamwork across traditional boundaries. The next time you're facing an emergency, instructors tell new hires, remember that the person who can help might not be wearing the uniform you expect. Stay open to assistance from anyone with the skills to save lives. Sofia's approach to emergency medicine became a model for hospitals throughout the region. The integration of experienced personnel into response teams, the emphasis on cross-training between different medical specialties, and the recognition that life-saving skills exist throughout the healthcare community, not just in the traditional hierarchy. Most importantly, Sofia proved that true professionals serve wherever they are needed, using whatever role allows them to make the greatest difference. She could have sought recognition for her military service or leveraged her expertise for career advancement. Instead, she chose to work quietly behind the scenes, ready to step forward only when lives depended on her skills. The next time you see someone in a simple uniform doing seemingly routine work, remember Sofia Klein. Remember that extraordinary capability often disguises itself as ordinary service, and that the person sitting next to you in the break room might be exactly who you need when everything goes wrong. Excellence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up, does what needs to be done, and goes back to work.
If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to The Veteran Story. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.